Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
Today, I've got a return guest and a very popular person this time of year, especially. I've got Luke Naylor, Arkansas Waterfowl Program Coordinator, join the show. Luke, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
I wanted to get you on here and just kind of give a brief overview of, the habitat, the duck numbers. We had a couple cold shots real early and, I think got people excited. But, with the opener only a few days away, what are you seeing around Arkansas, especially, we can go ahead and start just in kind of the northeast corner of the state. That's, always seems to be really popular and there's a lot of hunters over there. So what are you seeing in that area of Arkansas?
Yeah, I think that area, at least on some public lands, will have a little bit more water, probably the most water available to hunt of any region in the state. The Black River, for example, had stayed pretty high. And so November 16th, our staff went around the state and was closing water control structures on a lot of our green tree reservoirs and GTRs. And, probably up there, that will very quickly result in a lot of habitat and a lot of huntable acreage up on Dave Donaldson Black River WMA, for example. Overall, and this is sort of seems to be kind of true throughout a big part, well, really the state as a whole, I think, and especially maybe in the Delta, is just the change over the last few weeks. You mentioned a couple early cold fronts, which definitely happened. Arkansas duck hunters, especially on the Grand Prairie, which we'll get to in a minute, they talk about these Halloween mallards, right, that are coming in kind of early, typically before a lot of major cold fronts. Well, we got those cold fronts even before Halloween, and a fair bit of water, and things looked pretty good there for a few days. Fair bit of water on the landscape for that time of year. Typically, of course, the driest time of the year. But a decent amount of habitat out there in the agricultural field, and a fair number of ducks, including mallards. And it just observation, anecdotally, I know, but it seems to have just steadily dwindled since then. Most of the water left the landscape. A lot of it was not captured. Some of it because rice harvest was a bit delayed in a lot of places in the state. And of course, bean harvest was just getting rolling. And so we had some delays there, but then even in some harvested rice fields, lots of water just left the landscape. Free water came along, ducks got in those areas, and then it's just gone now. Anecdotally again, but the number of mallards I've seen in my drives around the Delta recently, feel pretty sparse, when it comes to the mallards. Geese came in early. A lot of folks have probably been already enjoying the goose hunting opportunities. And, so they're finding some roost sites and finding some feeding areas, of course, and they'll stick around. But, just overall not like what it was a few weeks ago. So kind of tough to tell what it's going to hold come this weekend. It definitely, there's been some private landowners actively managing habitat now and putting water back in rice fields, for example, to get them ready for duck hunters.
Yeah. And you kind of mentioned the geese and, Arkansas extended that white-fronted goose season, the early season, and I know a lot of hunters took advantage of that, myself included. The white fronts showed up early and in big numbers this year, which was, I got a lot of texts and emails like, oh man, there's tons of geese in this area. Do you think that as that habitat has changed over the course of the past 2 weeks, even those geese have kind of spread out a little bit and in doing something a little bit different than they were when they first showed up on the landscape there in Arkansas?
Yeah, definitely. With all of these birds, right? They're migratory birds, which is why they're so fascinating, of course, because they're great at finding resources and moving quickly and adapting to changing environments. That's how they survive, right? So they've definitely been jumping around. You know, you're familiar with geese over here in the Delta, and they just love those little sheet water, just in rainwater in rice fields, for example, early in the season. There's something about those areas that really attract them. And of course, as that water dried up, went away, the geese then shifted. It's not quite, we haven't had the green up yet in the bean field. It's starting to come along, but that's typically when, of course, a lot of the white geese get here, and both snow and Ross's geese and white front fennels kind of start to switch over to green brow in bean fields, for example. And they'll still, of course, they're using rice throughout the winter. But yeah, they definitely started moving around as well. You know, the white fronts have been coming early, as you know, for quite a few years now. And they were definitely even earlier this year. And a lot of folks I've talked to have noticed even more white geese early. Typically it'd be, about now that you start to really see the white geese moving through. A lot of people here are migrating during our modern gun deer season when it opens, which was this, the 14th and 15th of November here, right? And a lot of that happened earlier. A lot more white geese in the state, it seems, early this year. So everything's just kind of jumping and shifting around. Again, it's good that some private landowners we're flooding up agricultural fields now to provide some more habitat. And I've heard of places where folks have provided that habitat and they've had great waterfowl response, including good duck numbers, not just the geese coming in. But as it kind of is this time of year, it's pretty spotty. You have a field that's just loaded up, and then you may go through another half dozen rice fields that to you and me look about the same, and very few birds on it. And it's pretty inconsistent, which again is not abnormal for this time of year. It just seems like a few years here we've kind of had these early shots of rain and cold, which get everybody really excited. Like this is going to be the best opener ever, right? And then all of a sudden the world dries up. I think the forecast is for in the 70s maybe here on opening weekend. So it's like you can build all this excitement over a period of weeks, and then it's kind of let the air out of the balloon when it really gets down to it. So, but that's just for opening weekend, of course, right? We got a long season. There's a lot could change.
Yeah, absolutely. It is opening weekend, and I think that anticipation, that build up, is really part of everyone gets so fired up, and it's usually, I know at least for myself and the areas that I hunt, it's usually a 1 or 2 day shoot, and then those birds get a little smart and decide to go and find some safer habitats to avoid, but just kind of to move on with from the Delta over into the Grand Prairie. I've driven around and through the Stuttgart, Humnoak, England, some of these areas, and seen pretty decent numbers in a few spots. Like you said, it's very very spotty. But what are you guys seeing throughout those areas, and even a little further south of there? Humphrey, around that Biomeda area.
About the same. Just very hit and miss. And we've been paying a lot of attention. We've got this W rice program that we're doing here. We're releasing public access to private rice fields.
Yeah, very cool program, by the way.
Yeah, we love it. It's a neat program. So it's given us an opportunity to purposely go out to these areas, and it's only 3,800 acres out of over 1 million acres of rice, but it is fairly well distributed throughout the Delta. And some in Southwest Arkansas and in the Arkansas River Valley. So it's given us a reason to go out and look at these areas, right? And I've driven around to several of them in the past couple of weeks, and boy, you'll find one that's just got piles of birds in it, and one of them that doesn't look like a bird has been on it, and all of them in good regions, right? Good locations, good looking habitat, but just it's not to the point where there's widespread habitat and lots of birds spread across lots of different places in the Delta or the state as a whole. So it's going to be just like you described, I would expect. Good hunts early. There'll be a lot of ducks on those places that have a lot of birds now that obviously they'll get hunted and those birds will go find someplace else. And maybe the field that doesn't have any birds now will have birds next week. And so it's going to be a lot of that shifting around and finding refuge as you described.
Yep.
Pretty quickly. But like normal, we'll kind of have this first 10 days of the season. Lots of folks will have some good hunts. Lots of folks may have some not so great hunts. It'd be a little bit of everything in between. And then hopefully we'll kind of wait more rain and weather builds up through December. But I think, public land as well is pretty dry at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We have moist soil areas that we can flood up, and those that we can artificially flood. We're doing that as part of the staged flood up plan. But GTR wise, which are by and large just require runoff and natural runoff, we don't have pumping capacity on nearly all of those areas. So those are going to stay pretty dry again, with the exception of like Black River up in northeast Arkansas, but all the way down to southeast Arkansas as well. Lots of geese, ducks in certain areas where there's good water, and in other areas it's still dry and waiting on that next rain.
One thing that really jumped out to me is how much water that you guys did get a few weeks ago. And I kind of looked at it and I was like, oh man, those rivers are all bouncing up. Do you think that eventually could play into, kind of maybe just putting the water on the landscape, maybe improve that habitat a little bit? It's gone now, obviously, in some of these, major river corridors there. Do you think that, once late December hits and you get the water again, do you think that could, play into, improved habitat for some of those areas that don't have the water right now, but maybe will later in the winter?
Yeah, I think so. The Cache River, for example, I think a lot of folks were, I was driving along a couple access points, along that area last week, and, the river had jumped up, and I bet you a lot of people were excited about that, and current gauge readings show it's falling right out. So there's not going to be a ton of places along the Cache for people to hunt. I'm sure it'll be busy, but there's really not going to be that many places, for ducks or duck hunters when it starts and we don't have any rain in the forecast. I think a lot of the agricultural fields, the good news is the rainfall we did get, day lengths have been shorter. We had some cooler temperatures. I think a lot of the ground, at least now, is fully saturated, and what rain we do get is going to at least have the potential to pool up in those fields if people will leave water control structures closed. That's the biggest part of it, is just closing structures and making sure that habitat can stay when the rains do fall. I think the table's kind of set, but it's just going to need that natural runoff, of course, here or over the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, and kind of, just to kind of set that initial expectation, kind of what I'm seeing over there in a lot of areas, that I spend a bunch of time in is really a bunch of gadwall, bunch of pintails, bunch of, even, we had some big flocks of blue wings still just a couple weeks ago, and green wings, obviously. And so in a state that's so mallard driven, that it's really mallard centric, and a lot of the hunters there, they come to Arkansas to shoot the greenheads. What are you kind of telling people, like, hey, this is going to kick off and it's going to be some early ducks? How do you explain that to some hunters there?
Yeah, I think it's, a lot of those mallards are coming a little bit later. Not as late as I think some perceptions indicate. I think they build through December and kind of peak right around the first part of January, and then the fall migrations, southerly migrations, kind of over at that point. But we talked about these early mallards, which are kind of traditional to the state. And I've been out doing some deer hunting on wildlife management areas. I've been out looking around, like I said, checking these W Rice program fields, and you sit there, yeah, you'll hear some mallards quacking. They're out there, but man, it's covered up by a whole lot of spoonies splashing, gadwalls making their crazy noises, right? Teal buzzing, there's a whole lot of more of that going on than there are hen mallards out there in those fields, cutting loose. So, right. It's all about expectations. As you said, it's those places that are going to have that they're just mallard strongholds, that they're just a lot of those traditional places. And it doesn't have to be exclusively those traditional places, but I think of the fields I've looked at, they're generally a fairly low percentage of mallards at this point. They're there. There's definitely mallards in the state, but we're not doing a November aerial survey this year. But part of the reason being is that historically it's just pretty low duck counts, pretty low mallard counts. We might count at times close to 1 million mallards later in the winter, and maybe 200,000 in November. So if you look at that, it's really our long-term averages are about 20% of the ducks in the state when duck season opens are mallards. And that kind of holds just anecdotally with what I've been seeing on the rice fields I've looked at, or moist soil units that are flooded early. It's kind of that ratio. So there'll be plenty of people who have a chance to shoot mallards, but I wouldn't say I'd count on it.
Yeah, that's a good non-guarantee there. But, before I let you go, I wanted, one thing that we talk about a little bit around the office is, the South Mississippi Delta, as in the state of Mississippi, is really dry. States a little further north of Arkansas are a little drier than normal, at least drier than the last couple of years. Do you think that could have an impact on some of these birds that may get bounced out of, say South Dakota or Nebraska in the coming weeks? And there's not that much available habitat, for them to get into, and they may, Arkansas may really benefit from some of these drier conditions.
I think we could if we then have that habitat availability increase. If we get the water here, I think it's unfortunate, and I don't want to beat the drum too hard, but I think we kind of missed one of those early opportunities here. We had ducks here, and I know a lot of folks like to think of migration, especially of mallards, as somebody up north of here. It's always north of here, wherever you are. If it's Louisiana, it's Arkansas. If it's Arkansas, it's Missouri, right? But I think people like to think of somebody's got a big old bucket of mallards that they steadily pour out from the north, and they just move south, and that's it. And we really don't think that's true. I think there's a whole lot more jumping back and forth, north to south, east to west with these birds. And I think we had an opportunity to keep a lot of mallards around with that mid-October rain and cold. And frankly, a lot of that opportunity was lost because a lot of that habitat just disappeared off the landscape. Now, to your point, if we get relatively more rainfall and habitat here in Arkansas, I think you're exactly right. I think we do have the potential to support more of those birds this winter. Generally going way back, old research stuff from Mickey Heitmeyer and the like is that, these wet winters in the Delta, just that's where Arkansas shines compared to the rest of the mid-continent mallard range. So I think you're spot on that we've got that potential still. If we get another, 3, 4, 5 inch rain that provides substantial habitat across a broad scale, and say that's in comparison to other states that don't get that, I definitely would get excited if those conditions set up.
Awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, you left the door open for me because I'm an optimist guy. Optimism is key to success for any duck hunter. I'm convinced. So I'll take that and hope, we'll just have to sit around, and as usual, we do this every year. We have these similar conversations. We're going to have to wait on the weather and the conditions, hopefully some water, hopefully some cold, and it'll all work out in Arkansas. But I appreciate you joining me today, Luke. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. Appreciate it.
I'd like to thank my guest, Luke Naylor, Arkansas Waterfowl Program Coordinator, for joining me today. I'd like to thank our producer, Clay Baird, for putting the podcast together. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for listening and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.